Three night shift workers clocked out of a textile factory in 1986, but never made it to their cars. Their vehicles sat untouched in the parking lot. Their bags remained in the locker room. But the workers themselves had vanished without a trace. For 26 years, the mystery haunted the small industrial town, until demolition crews breaking down the abandoned factory discovered a sealed chamber in the old furnace room. Inside, 3 skeletons, industrial chains, and a message scratched into the concrete wall that would expose a horror hidden in plain sight for decades. Welcome to Hidden Legends. Before we begin this haunting story of vanished workers and a decades-old secret, tell me in the comments where you're watching from today. And if you believe stories like this need to be heard, hit that subscribe button and help us make sure they are. Now, let's step back to October 1986 to a small industrial town in Pennsylvania where the night shift at Riverside Textile Mill was about to become the center of one of the most disturbing disappearances in American labor history. October 14th, 1986, Riverside, Pennsylvania. The Riverside Textile Mill stood along the Allegheny River like a fortress of brick and steel. For 60 years, it had been the economic backbone of the town, employing 3 generations of families who worked the looms, dyed the fabrics, and kept the machines running 24 hours a day. Marcus Webb, the night shift supervisor, sat in his small office overlooking the factory floor. The rhythmic clatter of the looms created a hypnotic soundtrack that most workers learned to sleep through. But tonight, Marcus couldn't shake an uneasy feeling. 3 workers were scheduled for the graveyard shift. Raymond Torres, 34, a loom operator with 8 years at the mill. Linda Kowalski, 29, a quality control inspector known for her meticulous attention to detail. And James "Jimmy" Brennan, 41, a maintenance technician who could fix any machine in the building. They clocked in at 10:47 p.m., 10:51 p.m., and 10:58 p.m. respectively. Marcus remembered because he always checked the time cards, company policy. The shift was routine. Marcus made his rounds every 2 hours, checking production numbers, ensuring safety protocols were followed. At midnight, he saw Raymond adjusting tension on Loom 7. At 2:15 a.m., Linda was inspecting a batch of dyed cotton in the quality control station. At 4:30 a.m., Jimmy was in the maintenance bay, replacing a worn belt on one of the dryers. Everything was normal. At 6 a.m., the day shift began arriving. Marcus prepared the handoff report, a standard procedure he'd done hundreds of times. But when he went to find Raymond, Linda, and Jimmy for the end of shift briefing, they were nowhere to be found. Their time cards showed they'd clocked out. Raymond at 5:52 a.m., Linda at 5:54 a.m., Jimmy at 5:56 a.m. But their cars were still in the parking lot. Marcus walked through the factory, calling their names. The day shift workers joined the search. They checked the break rooms, the bathrooms, the storage areas. Nothing. Raymond's lunchbox sat on the table in the break room, half-eaten sandwich still inside. Linda's jacket hung on her locker. Jimmy's toolbox remained open in the maintenance bay, tools scattered as if he'd just stepped away. Marcus called the foreman, Gerald Pritchard, who arrived within 20 minutes. Gerald was a thick-set man in his 50s, known for running a tight ship. He had worked at Riverside for 32 years, starting as a floor worker and climbing to senior management. "What do you mean they're gone?" Gerald demanded. "Clocked out but never left," Marcus explained, showing him the time cards. "Their cars are still here." Gerald's face darkened. "Check the security footage." They went to the security office, a cramped room filled with monitors and VHS recording equipment. The overnight guard, an elderly man named Frank DeLuca, rewound the tapes. The footage showed Raymond, Linda, and Jimmy working through the night. At 5:50 a.m., all 3 walked toward the time clock area, and then the screen went to static. "What the hell?" Marcus muttered. Frank shook his head. "Tape must have malfunctioned. Happened sometimes with these old systems. Gerald ordered a full search of the premises, every room, every closet, every storage area. The police were called. By 9 a.m., Riverside Police Department had officers combing through the factory. Detective Sarah Castellano led the investigation. She was young, only 32, but she had a reputation for being thorough. She interviewed every worker on the day shift, examined the time cards, reviewed the security footage. "The tape malfunction is suspicious," she told Gerald. "Convenient timing." "These systems are ancient," Gerald replied. "We've been asking corporate for upgrades for years." Sarah wasn't satisfied. She brought in a forensics team to dust for prints, check for signs of struggle, analyze the security system. They found nothing unusual. Raymond's car, a 1979 Chevy Impala, was unlocked. His keys were in the ignition. Linda's Toyota Corolla was locked, keys nowhere to be found. Jimmy's Ford pickup had a flat tire, a detail no one could explain since he'd driven it to work without issue. The families were devastated. Raymond's wife, Maria, was 8 months pregnant with their second child. Linda's parents were elderly immigrants who spoke limited English and depended on her income. Jimmy's teenage daughter, Kelly, had just been accepted to college. The investigation dragged on for months. Police searched the river, dredged the waterways, questioned every employee multiple times. Theories emerged. Industrial accident with a cover-up, mob involvement, voluntary disappearance, foul play by a co-worker. But there was no evidence, no bodies, no witnesses, no motive. The case went cold. Riverside Textile Mill continued operations for another 8 years before economic pressures and overseas competition forced it to close in 1994. The building sat abandoned, a rusted monument to a bygone era of American manufacturing. For 26 years, the disappearance of Raymond Torres, Linda Kowalski, and Jimmy Brennan remained one of Pennsylvania's most baffling unsolved mysteries. Until April 2012. Riverside, Pennsylvania. April 2012. The abandoned textile mill had become a blight on the town. Broken windows, graffiti-covered walls, a magnet for vandals and urban explorers. The city council finally approved demolition, selling the land to a developer planning to build a shopping complex. Demolition began in early April. A crew from Apex Wrecking Company arrived with excavators, wrecking balls, and a mandate to level the structure within 6 weeks. Carlos Mendez, the site foreman, walked through the building on the first day, assessing the job. The place was a maze of corridors, rusted machinery, and decades of decay. Asbestos would need to be removed first, then the systematic takedown could begin. The crew worked section by section. The administrative offices came down first, then the loading docks, then the main production floor. By the 3rd week, they had reached the furnace room, a large chamber in the basement where the factory's old coal-fired heating system had once operated. On April 19th, a worker named Tommy Briggs was operating an excavator, tearing into the furnace room's southern wall. The building was solid brick, built to last, and progress was slow. At 2:30 p.m., Tommy's excavator bucket punched through the wall, and instead of hitting another bricklayer, it broke into a hollow space. "Hey, Carlos!" Tommy shouted, killing the engine. "Got something weird here." Carlos climbed into the excavator's cab to look. Behind the wall was a chamber, roughly 12 feet by 8 feet, completely sealed off from the rest of the building. There were no doors, no windows, no ventilation. "That's not on the blueprints," Carlos muttered. They widened the opening carefully. As dust settled, Carlos shone a flashlight into the darkness. He froze. Inside the chamber were 3 human skeletons, lying on the concrete floor. Industrial chains were wrapped around their ankles, bolted to the floor. And on the far wall, scratched into the concrete in letters 6 inches high, was a message. "The foreman locked us in. No one heard us. It's too late now." Carlo stumbled backward, his radio falling from his hand. "Jesus Christ! Tommy, call 911, right now!" Within an hour, the site was swarming with police, forensics teams, and medical examiners. Yellow tape cordoned off the entire building. News vans arrived, cameras rolling. Detective Sarah Castellano, now 58 and close to retirement, stood in front of the sealed chamber, staring at the skeletons. She'd thought about Raymond, Linda, and Jimmy countless times over the years, the case that got away, the mystery that haunted her career. "It's them," she whispered. Forensic analysis confirmed it within 72 hours. Dental records matched. Raymond Torres, Linda Kowalski, and Jimmy Brennan had been found. The autopsies revealed the horrifying truth. All three had died of dehydration and starvation. Based on the condition of the remains and the scratches on the walls, they'd survived in that chamber for approximately 5 to 7 days before succumbing. The chains around their ankles were industrial grade, the kind used to secure heavy machinery in the factory. The bolts securing them to the floor had been installed with professional precision. The message on the wall had been carved with a metal tool, likely something Jimmy had in his pocket. The handwriting analysis matched Jimmy's signature from factory documents. The foreman locked us in. Detective Sarah immediately pulled the 1986 case files. Gerald Pritchard, the foreman named in the message, had been thoroughly investigated at the time. He'd claimed he wasn't even at the factory that night. He'd called in sick with food poisoning and had a doctor's note to prove it. But Sarah had always found that suspicious. Gerald had never missed a shift in 32 years, and suddenly he's sick on the exact night 3 workers vanish? She contacted the Pennsylvania State Police, who assigned a cold case unit to re-examine Gerald Pritchard's alibi. What they discovered was damning. The doctor who'd written Gerald's sick note, Dr. Raymond Kellerman, had died in 1998. But investigators tracked down his medical practice records, now stored in a state archive. Cross-referencing the sick note's date and signature against Dr. Kellerman's appointment logs revealed something shocking. Gerald Pritchard had never visited the doctor's office on October 13, 1986. The sick note was a forgery. Further investigation uncovered Gerald's financial records from 1986. In November of that year, 2 weeks after the disappearances, Gerald had made a cash deposit of $50,000 into a savings account, an enormous sum for a factory foreman making $32,000 annually. When questioned about the source of the money, Gerald had claimed it was an inheritance from a deceased aunt, but genealogical records showed no such relative. The pieces were falling into place. May 2012. Gerald Pritchard, now 78 years old, lived in a modest ranch house in Clearfield, Pennsylvania, about an hour from Riverside. He'd retired from the textile industry in 1995 and lived alone after his wife passed away in 2008. Detective Sarah Castellano and 2 state police investigators knocked on his door on a rainy Tuesday morning. Gerald answered, his face pale and haggard. He'd lost weight since Sarah had last seen him. His hands trembled as he gripped the doorframe. "Mr. Pritchard, we need to talk about October 14th, 1986. Gerald's eyes filled with tears. "I knew this day would come." They arrested him without resistance. In the interrogation room, Gerald confessed. "I didn't want to do it," he said, his voice shaking, "but I owed money. Bad money. Gambling debts to people you don't say no to." In 1985, Gerald had developed a severe gambling problem, betting on sports and losing consistently. By early 1986, he owed $75,000 to a loan shark connected to organized crime in Pittsburgh. "They told me if I didn't pay, they'd kill my wife and daughter. I was desperate. The loan shark had offered Gerald a way out, helped facilitate a theft from the factory's inventory. Riverside Textile Mill produced high-end fabrics, some worth thousands of dollars per roll. The plan was simple. Gerald would let the thieves into the factory, they'd load up a truck with premium inventory, and Gerald would split the proceeds. But Raymond, Linda, and Jimmy had been working that night. They'd seen too much. "They were supposed to just tie them up," Gerald said, tears streaming down his face. "That's what they told me. Just restrain them for a few hours until the job was done. But when I came back to check on them, they'd already sealed the wall." "You could have called for help," Sarah said, her voice cold. "I was terrified. They said if I told anyone, my family would die. I thought maybe someone would find them in time. Maybe they'd hear them through the walls." But no one did. Gerald had forged the sick note, created the alibi, and used his managerial access to erase the security footage. The $50,000 deposit was his cut from the stolen inventory. "I've lived with this guilt every day for 26 years, he whispered. "I see their faces every night." June 2012. Gerald Pritchard was charged with 3 counts of felony murder, conspiracy to commit theft, obstruction of justice, and evidence tampering. Given his age and failing health, his attorney negotiated a plea deal, life in prison with the possibility of parole after 20 years in exchange for full cooperation in identifying the others involved. Gerald provided names: the loan shark, deceased since 1991. 2 accomplices, one serving time for unrelated crimes, the other tracked down in Ohio. Both were arrested and charged as accessories to murder. The families finally had answers. Maria Torres, now 60, stood at Raymond's grave, holding the hand of her daughter, the child born 2 months after Raymond's disappearance, now 26 years old and a school teacher. "Dad, we finally found you," she whispered. Linda Kowalski's parents had both passed away in the intervening years, but her younger brother, now 54, attended a memorial service held at Riverside's town hall. Jimmy Brennan's daughter Kelly, now 48 and a lawyer in Philadelphia, had spent years searching for her father. She'd never given up hope. "I always knew something terrible had happened," she told reporters, "but knowing is better than not knowing. Now he can rest." The sealed chamber in the furnace room became a makeshift memorial. Before the building's demolition was completed, hundreds of people visited, leaving flowers, candles, and notes. The city of Riverside commissioned a permanent memorial, a bronze plaque installed in the new shopping complex built on the factory's site. It read, "In memory of Raymond Torres, Linda Kowalski, and Jimmy Brennan, whose lives were stolen on October 14, 1986. May they rest in peace, and may their story remind us that evil thrives only when good people remain silent." Gerald Pritchard died in prison in 2014, 2 years into his sentence, from heart failure. Detective Sarah Castellano retired in 2013. In her final interview, she said, "This case taught me that the truth always finds a way. It might take 26 years, but walls can't hide secrets forever. Eventually, someone breaks through." The Riverside Textile Mill case remains one of the most chilling examples of how ordinary people, faced with desperate circumstances, can make choices that lead to unspeakable tragedy. But it's also a reminder that justice, though delayed, can still be served, and that the voices of the forgotten will eventually be heard, even if they have to scratch their final words into concrete walls.